I'm pregnant, Karen blurted out, her voice trembling as she stared into the eyes of her husband, Alex. The words hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall, but it wasn't the announcement of a new life that made his world spin. It was the unspoken truth hidden behind those three words. It wasn't his. Alex blinked, his face expressionless, trying to process what he had just heard. They had been trying for a baby for nearly 2 years. 2 agonizing years of doctor appointments, fertility treatments, and negative tests. His heart should have leapt at the news, but instead, he felt nothing but dread. His hands went clammy, and his stomach turned, but his voice remained calm. Is it mine? Karen's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. She hadn't expected him to ask outright, but the truth was already written across her face. She looked away, her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. There was a long silence, a silence so thick it could suffocate them both. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but it was enough to shatter the fragile wall of trust they had spent years building. Alex felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. The air in the room became heavy, suffocating. He could barely hear his own thoughts over the sound of his heart hammering in his chest. Rage, confusion, and heartbreak surged through him all at once. He felt the blood drain from his face, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Who? The word came out like a growl, low and dangerous. Karen couldn't meet his gaze. She knew this moment was inevitable, but she still wasn't prepared for the devastation in his voice. It was a mistake, she began, her voice trembling. It meant nothing, Alex. I swear it meant nothing. It was just once. I don't even know why I did it. Who? He repeated, louder this time, his voice shaking with anger. Tears welled up in Karen's eyes as she finally met his gaze. Jake, from the office. A sickening wave of nausea hit Alex like a freight train. He knew Jake. Jake had been to their house for barbecues, laughed with them, shared drinks. He wasn't just some faceless man. He was someone Alex had trusted. It made the betrayal that much worse. You slept with Jake? His voice cracked, and the disbelief in his tone was raw. My coworker? My friend? Karen sobbed, her hands shaking uncontrollably now. It wasn't like that. It just happened. We were working late. One thing led to another, and... One thing led to another? Alex interrupted, his voice rising as the anger boiled over. You make it sound so casual, Karen. How could you do this to us? To me? Karen couldn't answer. She was crying so hard now she could barely breathe. Her world was crumbling around her, and she knew there was nothing she could say to fix it. She had made the biggest mistake of her life, and it was too late to take it back. Alex turned away from her, running a hand through his hair as he paced the kitchen. His chest felt tight, as though he couldn't breathe, and his mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The woman he loved, the woman he had built his entire life around, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. And now she was pregnant. Pregnant with another man's child. He stopped pacing, leaning against the counter for support as he looked at her. She was standing there, broken and sobbing, but all he could see was the lie, the betrayal, the destruction of everything they had once shared. I trusted you, Karen. I trusted you more than anyone in this world, he said, his voice shaking. How could you do this to us? How could you throw everything away for him? Karen shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Alex. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a stupid, terrible mistake, and I regret it more than you could ever know. A mistake? He repeated bitterly. A mistake that ruined our marriage. A mistake that got you pregnant. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. Karen took a step toward him, her hands outstretched in a desperate plea. Alex, please, I love you. I love only you. I don't want this to end like this. We can get through this. We can fix it, I swear. But Alex stepped back, his face contorted with pain. Fix it? How do we fix this, Karen? How do I look at you and not see this? How do I accept that you're carrying another man's child? Karen's sobs intensified, and she dropped her hands to her sides in defeat. I don't know. I don't know how, but I'll do anything. I'll do anything to make this right, Alex. Please, just don't give up on us. For the first time, Alex felt a tear slip down his own cheek. He didn't want to give up on their marriage, but he didn't know how to move forward from something so devastating. The love they once shared was now overshadowed by betrayal, and the life they had planned together was now tainted by a future they hadn't chosen. I need space, Alex finally said, his voice low and broken. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. Karen nodded, her face streaked with tears. I understand, she whispered. I'll give you whatever you need. For the next few weeks, Alex distanced himself from Karen, drowning in his own thoughts. He moved into the guest bedroom and barely spoke to her, leaving Karen to grapple with the weight of her actions alone. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, was now cold and silent, suffocating both of them with its emptiness. At work, the situation was even worse. Seeing Jake every day was like rubbing salt in a fresh wound. Alex couldn't look at him without feeling the urge to punch him in the face. But he held back, not out of respect for Jake, but because Alex wasn't ready to confront the reality of the situation in public. He needed time to think, to plan, to decide what he was going to do about his crumbling marriage. Jake, of course, knew. The guilt was written all over his face every time their eyes met, but neither man dared to speak about it. It was an unspoken war, a battle of silent glares and tense moments. But one afternoon, as Alex sat alone in his office, Jake knocked on the door and stepped inside, his face pale and tense. Alex, he began, his voice low. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I need to talk to you. Alex glared at him from behind his desk, his heart pounding. What the hell do you want? Jake swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he stood before Alex. I'm sorry, he said, his voice shaking. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know what came over me that night. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Alex's jaw clenched. He stood up, walking slowly around his desk until he was face to face with the man who had destroyed his life. You didn't mean for it to happen? He repeated, his voice dripping with venom. You didn't mean to sleep with my wife? Didn't mean to get her pregnant? Jake flinched, guilt written all over his face. I swear, it wasn't planned. It was a mistake, Alex, and I regret it more than you'll ever know. A mistake, Alex spat, his voice rising. You made a mistake, and now my entire life is falling apart. Do you even realize what you've done? Jake took a step back, his face pale. I do, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I don't want to ruin your marriage, Alex. I'll stay out of your lives if that's what you want. I won't interfere. I'll take responsibility for the baby, but I won't come between you and Karen. Alex's eyes narrowed. You think it's that simple? That you can just walk away and leave me to pick up the pieces of this disaster? Jake shook his head. No, it's not simple. I know that. But I don't know what else to do. I'm trying to make this right in whatever way I can. Alex took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he struggled to contain his anger. He wanted to lash out, to hurt Jake the way he had been hurt, but he knew that violence wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he closed his eyes, trying to steady himself. I don't know what I'm going to do, he said finally, his voice low. But I'm not sure if I can ever forgive either of you for this. Jake nodded, his face filled with regret. I understand. And I'm sorry. With that, Jake turned and left the office, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts once more. Months passed, and the tension between Alex and Karen never truly faded. They went through the motions of their daily lives, but the love they once shared was buried under layers of pain and betrayal. Karen tried to reach out, tried to make amends, but Alex remained distant, unable to move past what had happened. Karen's pregnancy progressed, and as her belly grew, so did the weight of their unspoken pain. The child growing inside her was a constant reminder of her infidelity, a living symbol of the damage she had caused. She hoped that once the baby was born, things might change, that Alex might see the child and somehow find it in his heart to forgive her. But deep down, she feared that the damage was irreparable. One night, as Karen sat alone in the living room, cradling her swollen belly, Alex entered the room. His face was tired, his eyes hollow from months of sleepless nights and endless internal battles. "I can't do this anymore, Karen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Karen's heart dropped, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sat down on the edge of the couch. "I've tried, Karen. I've tried to move past this, to forgive you, but I can't. Every time I look at you, all I see is the betrayal, and I can't raise another man's child." Tears filled Karen's eyes, and she shook her head desperately. "But I love you, Alex. I'll do anything to make this work. I'll make it up to you, I swear." Alex looked away, his heart breaking at the sight of her tears. "I don't doubt that you love me, Karen, but sometimes love isn't enough. This is too much for me." Karen sobbed, her entire body shaking as the reality of his words sank in. "Please, Alex, don't leave me, don't leave us." But Alex stood up, his face set with determination. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I can't live with this anymore." And with that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Karen alone, devastated and pregnant with the weight of her regret. Karen gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, but the joy she felt was marred by the overwhelming sadness of her broken marriage. Alex never returned. He couldn't. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound. And though Karen loved her son, every time she looked into his eyes, she was reminded of the man who had left her and the mistake that had destroyed her life. She lived with that regret every day, knowing that her actions had cost her the one person she had truly loved.